Okay, if we could have everybody take their seats again. I just want to mention that if there's anyone that did not get handouts, we do have extra handouts in the back by the Fiesta banner. So if you did not get handouts, they are available. Okay, we need to get going again. So we've had a couple of people that have been co-presenting, and we have two more. These guys are, again, not from Albuquerque. We could get everyone to settle down because we're already running a little bit behind. So several people have mentioned Blast Valve, and Rick Jones is the creator and the maintainer of the Blast Valve website, and he is one of our speakers. He has served on the BFA board and local boards, and he's been president of several boards as well as the BFA president in the past. He's a commercial pilot with about 14 hours of flight time. He's flown over 5 different continents. He's co-presenting with Kevin Raymond from Pike, New York. And Kevin started crewing in 2004 and became a commercial pilot in 2009. He's flown all different sizes from AX4s up to AX10 size balloons and does well in competition and has built his own tie-dye balloon. So please welcome both Rick and Kevin.
Thanks, Beth. I first got to know Beth when I was BFA president, and she wanted to tell me exactly how things should be done, and I was smart enough to follow her advice. So we're here to talk about some safety issues that involve gutches. And originally I was going to do a presentation on switching systems because there's a lot of challenges with pilot education involved in switching systems because we're all taught to fly. We've got our 10, 20, 30 hours of instruction, and we're off. And just ask our crew and our passengers. We are the best pilots out there on the entire field or maybe the world. We don't really need any more education. But you see lots of situations. I've been in a bunch where I was maybe somewhere overseas and I climb in a basket and I'm used to one thing, and it's an antique Thunder and Colt with 4 burners, 9 tanks, hoses running everywhere, crossovers. And the pilot who's supposed to show me how to do it is on the far side of the basket because there's a major distraction on the other end of the basket. And we'll go into more detail on those. Or accidents like I had a friend who's rushing to inflate in a crowd at a festival. They've given him half an hour really to sunset. They're letting him fly. He's just switched from being a Firefly pilot to having a large Lindstrand system. And it's got this cool new fuel system called TEMA. You just click the things on. They're really nifty, except nobody ever showed him how to use it. He doesn't understand there's a lock to make sure it's engaged, and he jams one on, turns to do the next thing. One of the little gaskets in it has broken and is jamming the thing. It doesn't engage properly. He hasn't locked it, and when he turns his back, it pops off, and there's a propane fire spraying all over the place in the middle of a large crowd. A bunch of people end up in a hospital from this. Get proper training. We're going to go into detail on a lot of those, but a special opportunity came up to have a speaker on an accident in Nunda, New York, that happened 2 years ago. And 2 years ago is significant because a long time ago I noticed that every 2 years in America, somebody falls off a basket and is usually killed. Could be a passenger, it's usually a crew member. Once or twice it's been a bystander. It's been 2 years. So if we don't do something better, we're due for one now. And it could be your best friend, it could be one of your crew members, but there are things that can be done. And so this we're going to talk about is the 7th flight on a new system. It's up to you to decide between systems, or was it caused by other factors, because there's here. Kevin Raymond was the other pilot flying that night. He flew for the same company, and the two of them fly side by side frequently. He knows everyone involved in the accident. He's talked to almost all the witnesses, many of which he already knew very well because he's from a small town. He did a study on what happens with this, and he did a video on how you can get caught up on a basket. He's going to show the video, and he also came up with a solution to help prevent people from getting caught on. Because he's a public school teacher, he knows physics teachers, he got some physics input for the presentation, so he'll go through all that. It's fairly, I was supposed to be clicking these, wasn't I? Not that way. So, the local flying community is very small. These two pilots flew together all the time. The pilot who was involved in the accident told me he thought of Kevin as his best friend. And one of the tragedies in this whole thing is they just aren't best friends anymore. He said they talked all the time, they shared weather, they had the same viewpoint, they really seemed to see flying and ballooning the same way. You know, Kevin has told me he saw this other pilot as a mentor, you know, one of the most important people in his life, almost like a father, but things change, and Kevin's going to discuss the accident with you. And after that, we'll go back over a number of ways you can prevent these types of things.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm here to discuss talk mostly about my best friend, Ryan Allmeter. It's tough not noticing the crew chiefs and the pilots interacting at festivals, and think about him quite often. I'm going to talk about the balloon accident that claimed his life, and most of this is a narrative because I've been thinking about this for 2 years. I want to say what I need to say and have thought about it. And then maybe I'm going to touch on the potential hazards of rope-style handles. So if you could cue up my presentation, we'll get started. But Ryan was a wonderful human. He was a wonderful family man. He was a loving father. Let me go. There he is. That's our last flight together, up to 15,000 feet for a little while. Which one do I press? Oh, that. Okay. Ryan was a wonderful family man. He was a loving husband and a great father to 3 beautiful children. He was always busy doing things for others. He loved raising his kids. He spoke about them all the time. He taught them great lessons in Sunday school at church. His 3 rowdy sisters and wonderful parents made the family gatherings welcoming and entertaining. They were just really great people. We worked together in a small high school in the beautiful town of Nunde. This is where he touched many lives. He was a great math teacher, oftentimes staying late to tutor students until they got it. 10 years ago, I received my private certificate, and Ryan, my buddy, was my first passenger. We set up behind his house, took off over his hometown. We flew over a couple windmills and landed in a field. The joy of ballooning was shared, and a great friendship became a brotherhood. We completed hundreds of flights, from hooking up the trailer to chatting for hours on the tailgate after sunset. Our mutual respect and admiration was evident to everybody who flew with us. And it was something people commented on, just how lucky we were to have each other. Among the most common questions people would ask was, hey, have you ever been out there to that big one? That big one out west? And I said, well, not yet, but someday. We're both school teachers, but today is that day. Here we are. If you could play the video here. As Rick touched upon, Ryan and I started working for the ride company in La Letchworth State Park in 2010. We flew our Sweetheart rides in my 90. Eventually moving into a 141 and 210. This video is made by a passenger on that evening that was in my basket. So it's a choppy edit, but few things are interesting to see. In the spring of 2016, the company bought a brand new AX-11. Ryan became the crew chief of the company to help with the recruitment, because we're both teachers, and to work with the kids and with scheduling. On June 10th, 2016, the forecast was perfect for ballooning operations in this area. Light surface winds with winds aloft from the west predicted to guide our balloons safely towards the east side of the park. Both balloons floated over the waterfalls in Letchworth Gorge. I climbed to an altitude of 4,500 feet to catch stronger winds about 15 knots from the west. The other balloon did the same and ended up right above me towards the end of the flight. This is where you can kind of skip ahead if you would. Skip ahead a minute for me. The balloon Ryan was crewing for that night descended into a northeast wind at about 3 knots. It landed using a parachute valve softly in a field. The surface winds were calm. If you would kind of skip ahead a little bit more. Here's the balloons descending after the flight. And the pilot radioed to his crew to get permission from the landowner. They had to find a place to turn around, go up to the farm and ask. In the meantime, the pilot called the landowner and got permission. He radioed back to the crew asking where they were, that he had permission, and what was taking so long. The tone in his voice was of frustration. As Ryan pulled into the field, he told another crew person that he shouldn't even be there that night. He should be with his family who were camping at a local campground. My family was just across the road from them for that weekend. It was a beautiful flight. It was just picturesque. I'll go over the map. It's in your handout there. So this is, let's see. Here's right about where the balloon lands. Okay. The crew then walks it. The balloon takes off a second time. The victim falls. Balloon lands that second time, now across the road in the hedgerow. And then the balloon is deflated after they walk it about 5 football fields. They parked the truck along the hedgerow and pull out a cart onto the flat area of the field for deflation. They were going to have the passengers get out and walk the balloon and fly it onto a poorly designed cart. This cart was redesigned a few times. It was a brand new system, different cart, and it was difficult to load the basket. This was the first time that they attempted this maneuver, to have passengers get out of the balloon and fly the basket onto a cart. The basket was perpendicular to the cart, and Ryan was on the front side, meaning he was right in front of the pilot on the front side of the basket. So they had to turn it 90 degrees as they were going along. As the last 2 passengers got out of the balloon rose. The 4-man crew and 2 passengers last to disembark managed to hold it down. They started to move the empty balloon using the rope handles on the side, and the pilot overburned. The basket ascended. They were all picked off the ground. 4 crew members and 2 passengers. 5 out of the 6 people, estimated at 800 to 900 pounds, fell from the balloon. 1 crew member fell about 2 to 3 feet. The pain in his fingers was so great he looked down to make sure that he still had them. As the balloon took off quickly, people yelled for him, yelled to Ryan to let go. His response was, "I can't." He is at about 25 feet at this point, and the balloon is ascending. Ryan yells to the pilot, "You have to get me down." The pilot looks over and sees Ryan is below the basket. He responds, "Geez, I didn't know you were there." The passenger snaps this photograph. This was one of the two passengers last to get off the balloon. They wrote a very moving sympathy card to the widow. I had their address, I contacted them, and talked to them at length. If you can see in this photograph, right about here, it's tough to see in this room, but this is the bottom of his right foot, the bottom of his left. The basket rises several hundred feet. It slowly drifts over a hedgerow, as seen on the map at first hedgerow. Ryan's hands are numb at this point, the blood being cut off, his muscles compressed, his hands are sweating and slipping. The balloon eventually starts to descend over a planted cornfield. The pilot operates the burner, leveling off a couple hundred feet above the ground. The passenger takes this second photo. Ryan can no longer feel his hands as he struggles for his life. His arms are stretched, his muscles are failing, he begins to kick his legs. He is losing his grip. Pure terror of which we cannot imagine is upon him. Unable to hold on, Ryan slips from the basket and falls. He screams on the way down. His body is crushed into the field before the second hedgerow. The balloon travels over the hedgerow across an open field of grass, over a 20-foot telephone line, and lands in the trees on the other side of the road. The balloon is then walked an impressive length from the scene before deflating. These last two photographs of Ryan were taken almost a minute apart. The shock and grief expressed by the family goes without saying. It was awful. For me, the worst was when Ryan's youngest daughter, Sophia, climbed up onto my lap the following evening at the campgrounds and asked me where her daddy was. Her soft voice turned to screams, crying out for him. Students organized a balloon lantern ceremony at the school, and the whole community came out in support. His father made a cross and was placed at the field. Ryan died on a Friday and was buried on Thursday. The sight of a hot air balloon flying out of Letchworth the very next day was hard on his loved ones. Ryan's family held a benefit and raised money for his funeral costs. The stages of mourning were felt for many days, weeks, and months to come. The words I can't have filled my thoughts. Why did he say he couldn't let go? Was it a psychological response that he was frozen in fear? That he'll get hurt or die? He was a mathematician and very smart. Was it a cognitive response? He knew the statistics on fatal falls, and so he wasn't going to let go. Or was it a physical one? His hands are trapped by the rope handles by pressure and gravitational forces on weight. To me, the words "I can't" said twice fits best with a physical response. Also, when the crew and the passengers made the first 911 calls, they reported that he was caught in the ropes or lines. So as first responders drove down the road, they could see the balloon, but they couldn't see Ryan. They were looking for a person caught in the telephone line above the ground. I researched crew falls and came across Rick Jones's investigation reports. I spoke to different leaders in the ballooning community, in the ballooning world, about handle designs and potential dangers associated with the rope style handle. This prompted me to test the handles using a forklift. Can you play this video? The goal was to figure out what happened to my best friend that night. It was never to be and has never been used in any legal action. I made the video to share and cause awareness. This happens after I spoke to the woman who was last out of the basket and who was picked off the ground with the rest of them. She's the one who told me, Ryan said, I can't. And so we strapped the basket to a forklift and had participants of different ages and weights and strength try it out. We had crew, pilots, and members of the fire department that were first on the scene that night. You can see from the close-ups, the thumb isn't in there, pinky finger wiggles out, slips out, but certain digits are pinched pretty tight against the basket. We found that the handles pinch and squeeze your fingers against the side of the basket. The only way to release them, and this is, I think, really important, the only way to really release your fingers when they're pinched like that is to do some kind of a pull-up, is to pull up to get down. And I think this is very counterintuitive. You want to get down. You want to get down fast. This happens really quick. We can probably go to the next. There we go. There are thousands of baskets out there with rope handles being flown in the world today. I came up with a simple retrofit for those style handles, and by adding hose reel stops. They're plastic or rubber balls that come apart, and they're meant to go on the end of a hose to prevent it from going back into a reel. If you can play this video too. So we put them on the basket, and not one participant had a hard time simply letting go. There was space in between that rope and the basket. And if you can, maybe go ahead to some people told me that I should buy a bunch of them and sell them, and so I looked into it. I tried to order 100 to give away at National Seminar. When I was asked by the receptionist, "What are you doing with all these rubber balls you're trying to order?" I told her, and she said she'd get back to me, and she never did. The same sort of spacing could be achieved in the manufacturing of the basket, I think, if a knot was tied in the rope as it's woven out and then back into the basket. We tested the toggle handles on an Aerostat basket, and without a problem, the participants could let go. Simply, the body has more strength to twist the arm than it does to do a pull-up, to get the hands out. Since the release of the video, other balloon organizations have used a forklift to investigate this type of situation. So I've heard some people say, and this has been over the last year or so, well, how did the others get their hands out then if they were trapped? And how did Ryan's hands become released if they were trapped so tightly? So what happens to the last guy if 5 people drop off a balloon? It goes up, it accelerates, it goes up quickly. This is something that was stated by every single eyewitness that night. OSHA states that a fall from 6 to 15 feet is 25% fatal, if not fatal, serious injuries. The American College and Surgeons Committee on Trauma report that the threshold for survival of a fall from height is around 20 to 25 feet. So that's what's really important. That's what we're focused on, is what happens in that first 20 feet. So the following, just something I was thinking of, is this idea of acceleration. What happens when the balloon lifts off the ground that fast? A scenario with rough calculations not meant to duplicate the accident. So take, for example, you have a balloon overheated, it loses weight and accelerates at 600 feet per minute. Acceleration of gravity on Earth is 9.81 meters per second, which equals 1 G. We walk around experiencing 1 gravitational force every day. The gravitational force on mass gives us our weight. The change in velocity and vertical speed of a hot air balloon is acceleration or g-force. For example, if a balloon lifts off the ground under this scenario, it's about 10 feet per second. This is approximately 1/3 g. This means that the gravitational force on a 200-pound person who's on the basket makes them feel like they're 260 pounds, or 33% heavier. The physics teacher at school was really intrigued by this. He also crewed for hot air balloons in his youth. He did some calculations using simple trigonometry, and under no acceleration of the fingers, his calculations, about 36 to 58 pounds pounds of pressure are experienced on the hands. Under 1/3 g, it's about 46 to 75 pounds. If you have only one hand trapped, you can pretty much double those figures. This is all happening in a split second when you're uncorked with the balloon off the face of the earth. Sometime after the initial climb, there is no additional g-force. Muscles in the fingers are compressed, fatigue, sweat, become numb, bones fracture, dislocate, slip, and eventually release. In Ryan's case, the balloon went up very fast. The sudden change in altitude created acceleration forces that are hard to imagine or calculate. Ryan's body felt a lot heavier at the critical moment that he wanted to let go, get down, as the basket was rising quickly. But I'll be the first one to say that rope handles did not kill my friend. Nor did a heart attack or stroke. He died from massive trauma as a result of the fall. Ryan's body was given a thorough toxicology exam by the Monroe County Medical Examiner, as well as the FAA in Oklahoma. He was negative for everything. The NTSB investigator pointed out in one of his reports that according to Part 61, a medical certificate was not required of the pilot. But it also states that the pilot should have no known medical defect that makes him unable to pilot a balloon. Ryan's case was overshadowed by what happened in Texas just 20 days later. NTSB investigators were reassigned. But 2 years was a really long time for us. After almost 2 years, myself and another pilot got an email asking for more information on the same day that Ryan's widow was called. It felt like they were just cleaning off their desk. We were all very disappointed. At the best, and if you guys have read through it, this very vague report puts the cart before the horse as to the cause and factor. It also excludes one key factual component. Ryan and his family deserve better. The pilot in command of an aircraft is a person aboard the aircraft who's ultimately responsible. We all know that. We need to finish our flights. To me, a balloon flight is not over until it's packed in the bag. The local FSDO involved stated that the balloon had landed and flight operations were over. An inadvertent liftoff occurred. The FAA took no action. OSHA, another organization involved, cited an unsafe work environment not free from falls, not free from the hazards of falling. If you're interested, I really encourage you to read through the public docket of ERA 16 LA 210. So my thoughts on moving forward, and I know Rick's going to come up here and add some more. If you have rope handles, buy some hose reel stops, and with the turn of a screwdriver, you can take away any chance of this happening to you. Recently, I saw a basket that was for sale. It's on T4, I think, here, and they had used the hose connectors on there. That night, there were 4 crew members who knew better. Ryan was one of them. He taught the other boys to let go. and there were 2 passengers who did not. What happened is they all reacted. They all did the same thing, and they were all picked off the ground. Another thing you could do is maybe when you're purchasing a brand new basket, ask them to build it with toggle handles. Third, if you have a person hanging on the side of your basket, hopefully you remember this and pull the red line. Vent and don't stop. You're in an emergency situation, and the only chance for that person's survival is to get close to the ground. And last, God forbid if you're ever involved in an accident where there's injury or death, the best thing to do is to tell the truth. Honesty and remorse leads to forgiveness. It will all work out in the end. The family of the victim will heal better. Certain stages of grief will be easier to manage, and finally, closure. Say you're sorry and take responsibility for your actions. When we are faced with difficult situations, it's how we handle them that makes us who we are. Ryan was a wonderful human being who did a lot of great things in a short time on earth. I'm thankful and truly blessed for the time that we had together. Thank you for your time. Let me share his story.
Well, that'll be a challenge to follow. Our goal here, though, is that this not happen again, that it's not your crew member or you that this happens with. And there are, if we could switch back to my presentation, please. There's a number of common factors. I've done talks on a bunch of these accidents around the country, and there's a bunch of common factors. The first one is communication. It takes a lot of communication to deal with these. Originally, I thought these were fairly easy accidents to deal with and we could sort them out easily. But they're actually complex, and there's a lot of different variations on them. Another common factor is people are surprised. You know, there's a surprise element in this one. Baskets are big, warm, friendly. People just don't see them. They're going to jump up in the sky and kill people. And expectations. You know, they're not expecting this type of stuff to happen. So we'll talk a little bit more on how to prevent, because there's more than one way to fall from a basket. But people get caught getting dragged under a basket. They get lifted off the ground by the basket. Some of them get lifted off by the ground by ropes. Some of our landings that are fall, the basket hits the ground hard, it bounces, somebody falls out and either grabs back onto the basket or grabs onto a rope and gets lifted and falls from that. But track of that it's not just rope handles that cause the problem. Rope handles are an issue, but if you're thinking, I don't have rope handles, I don't have a problem, you have a crew at risk. Here's a few accidents that we can look at. Here's one in 1997 here in New Mexico. A ground crew member is killed falling from rope handles. In 2003 in California, a firefly, a large firefly, a bystander grabs onto handles and falls, and they're not rope handles on most fireflies. 2004 in West Virginia, a Firefly Galaxy, the pilot is killed. This one's interesting. He had some clever way to prevent the problem described in the accident that involved wrapping the rope around his leg. Let's just say it didn't really work out the way he had in mind. In Kentucky, on a Lindstrand, somebody grabs onto the basket as it ascends because they slipped on the grass just as it was about to go, and they reflexively grab onto the basket, and then they fall. They're not killed, but they're seriously injured. In 2005 in New Jersey, on a Cameron, this Cameron had a lot of long lines. There's like little bags inside to feed the lines, and the pilot didn't like these. His practice was to lay these lines out on the ground in front of the basket and prevent passengers and stuff from going in front of the basket. His wife is his crew chief. She manages to get tangled in these ropes as he lifts off the ground. Being a quick thinker, he drags the balloon through a tree to try and knock her off. That sort of succeeds. She falls through a barn roof. This is not a divorce story. She falls through a barn roof and barely misses a bunch of very sharp equipment on the floor of the barn. And this being New Jersey, of course, she turned around and sued her husband to get the insurance money. This caused enough stress in the insurance industry. This is when I started requiring waivers for crew members. This accident is the exact cause of that. In 2007 in Louisiana, in an Ultra Magic, a pilot is seriously injured. This is a case where at a hard landing, the basket tips, the pilot and the passenger fall out. The pilot doesn't realize the passenger's also fallen out, sees it going up. There's a rope hanging down out of the basket. He grabs onto it, gets lifted quite a ways in the air, and falls off. In 2010, again, on a Lindstrand, passenger lost their grip, feet from the hand, from handles, from the rope handles again. 2003, up in Montreal, Quebec, we have a few friends of this pilot in the room. On an Aerostat, a pilot is coming in to land. Another pilot has already landed. This landed pilot grabs the drop line from this other balloon, but the balloon does not land. It ends up going back up. The pilot is lifted off the ground in the drop line and sadly falls and is killed. So there's a lot of ways you can fall from a basket and get hurt. It's something you really need to be communicating with crew about. Now, a number of other people have done some research on baskets. One of them, I was told that at a safety seminar here in Albuquerque at Airco this winter, they did a similar forklift experiments to Kevin's and got similar results. I'm told they worked out a few processes. One suggested goes higher than that, time to let go. The manufacturer brought this basket Kevin was talking about that's involved with this accident back in their factory, they tell me. They say they weren't able to duplicate the results of the hand being trapped against it. They said this basket has much larger handles. In fact, it says many of them, as they can remember, have larger handles than on the example basket. They also said big baskets have a little bit different space between the handles. But also, they have a theory that the passengers on the forklift expected to be taken aloft. And it's a little hard to explain this, but they think that the manufacturer's theory is if you're expected to be taken aloft, you put your hand further into the handle, more between the second knuckle and the palm, and if you're just holding a basket regularly, you hold it more between the first knuckle and the second knuckle. I don't know. I think that would take a bunch of crew. My experience is crew do things a lot of different ways. But that's some of what they found and what they believe. Involved in this accident Kevin was talking about is also a friend of mine. He's not speaking at safety seminars because there is a lawsuit on this, and he doesn't feel it's appropriate while the lawsuit is going on. Kind of an interesting situation, because unlike some balloon pilots, to fly in the state park by the waterfalls, he's required to have workers' comp insurance, and does. And in most states, workers' comp insurance is the sole remedy for an employee injured at work. As a result, the family isn't really able to sue the pilot. There is a workers' comp settlement. I don't know exactly how much it is, but these things are defined by state law. And so the pilot strongly recommends that all of you should have workers' comp insurance, because if you think about it, the fine ladies and gentlemen in the back of the room selling us insurance have a pretty limited policy for passengers, $100,000, $200,000, maybe some of them have more, but it's not very much coverage on the value of somebody's life. Workers' comp is complete protection if a crew member's hurt. The pilot says that this particular balloon has an awful lot of long rope. They got entangled in the bottom of the basket, and basket and so forth. He can't imagine the balloon's going anywhere. And so he is crouched down and says he's organizing these ropes on the floor when the basket goes up. And he said that he didn't even know he was off the ground when he stood up. So he was surprised. So his big lesson is don't ever think you're done until the balloon is completely deflated. And another one of his, he never would have dreamed that the balloon would go off again. So for all of us, we need to remember the balloon can always take off again. You know, if you're on the ground and you have people getting out, you're changing equilibrium, you should really have a hand on that red line at all times. Because I've done these talks a lot, most of them involve a lot more accidents. What's really scared me isn't all these accidents, it's what happens after the talk when a dozen of you will come up to me and tell me about the time it happened to you and how you lifted somebody off the ground. Holding a handle, they might have been hand in hand around an upright, there's a bunch of different ways, and how it scared them to death. But usually these stories have one thing in common. They pulled that red line hard, and they pulled it early. And they hung on, and they got to the ground as they could. And that seems to be pretty good advice. So, you know, I talked a little bit earlier about common factors. There's a lot of different assumptions out there. I had an hour-long conversation with a pilot from New Jersey who believes the crew should never, ever let go of the basket unless he tells them to under any circumstances. I can't imagine a scenario in which that makes sense. I think you're in a world where the crew should always keep their feet on the ground and they should always say, hey, you're the pilot, fly this thing, I'm staying on the ground. In terms of how to prevent it, I think the first thing is lots of communication. The crew needs to be talking to crew, the pilot needs to be talking to crew, lots of communication, create awareness. And this starts before you ever take off. Training, train your crew on these things are dangerous. And it's dangerous to crew primarily because it can lift you off the ground. It should be covered in your briefing. How many of you have briefed the crew on the fact the fan is dangerous? Probably pretty often, right? How many of you regularly brief the crew on the fact that the basket is dangerous and could lift them off the ground and kill them? Yeah, not as many hands. How many of you seen an NTSB report on a fatal fan injury? From the United States? I don't think you've seen one. Australia? Yes. But there's an awful lot of them on fatal basket injuries. So I would say basket briefings are more important than fan briefings. People can see a fan is dangerous. Technique, you need to practice technique for it to be good, not just think about it. Pilot needs to always be aware of how lift is in that balloon. How close are they to going off the ground? Keep track of your temperatures, keep track of everything else. You want to have that red line in your hand when you're on the ground and maneuvering that balloon. You might think you're aware of the lift, but I've been surprised. You could be too. Don't get distracted. You land, there's often an awful lot of interesting distractions. I landed in a schoolyard today. There were 200 screaming distractions all around me. It was a lot of fun. But I need to get, Kevin flew with me this morning. He's not the most petite passenger I've ever flown. When he gets out, that hand needed to be on the red line. Watch for problem behavior. Some crew like to really hang on the basket. They're right around it, they own it. Some have their feet in the steps. Tell them no, tell them why. Crew, you need to be trained on this too. You need to practice. Always be ready to let go. Never put yourself in a position where you can't let go immediately. Limit how you touch the basket. Some ways are okay. If it means you can't let go, it's not good. Keep yourself clear of ropes and lines. Sometimes they're out there. Some baskets they're long, some they're short. Communicate with the crew and the pilot. Here in Albuquerque, it's great. Enthusiastic crew, they run, they jump. You're coming in super fast to a field. There's already some other balloons there. You can hear, you can time your landing to when you pull the red line for when the footprints are getting closer. Because these guys are leaping onto your basket with gusto. But not all those balloons slide in gracefully. Some of them kind of, based on what some of the repair stations told me yesterday, I think we might have had a few of these yesterday, they didn't come in like this. They came in more like this. And you'd hate to be the one that grabbed that basket as it went like this, because you could end up on my list of accidents. If you're holding rope handles, another manufacturer has told me, don't hold them this way. That traps your body weight. Turn your hand around and hold them with the knuckles against the wicker. Hold them this way, and your hand's not trapped the same way. You can still let go. It's so counterintuitive, it's simple, but if it kept you alive, it'd be a pretty cool thing to try. Limit the height you hold it at. Work as a crew together and figure out, what's the right height. I don't know what the exact right height is. Is it waist high, like has been suggested here? Is it shoulder high? That's something could be figured out. Most important, believe it could happen to you. If you believe you could be lifted off the ground, I think you'll take the steps to prevent it. So, how tight are we on time? Okay, we're there. So, we'll skip your stories. I have the wrong one. There we go. Any questions? Way, way, way in the back? I need it louder, Rob. Thank you. What Rob is saying, I know it's probably hard to hear, is that he's noticed in the last several years, 25 to 30% of their claims are now happening after landing. People land the balloon, they get complacent, they move it, things go wrong, it's costing them a lot of money. In fact, I noticed he's retiring. So before we drive the others into retiring, his point is, you land the balloon, take it down where it is. That maneuvering phase is surprisingly dangerous. Anyone else? All right, thank you very much. I very much appreciate being here.
Thank you, Rick and Kevin, and thank you all for coming. Please be sure to fill out your evaluation forms. There's boxes by both doors. Ursula has one in her hand there, and there's one over by Debbie in the purple in the corner there. Please fill out your evaluation forms so that we know what we need to cover in our next safety seminar. We'll see you all out in the field. Thank you.